The night had descended upon the Zubi forests of Burkina Faso like a heavy curtain, bringing with it a tempest of biblical proportions. Lightning split the sky with such ferocity that it transformed darkness into blinding daylight, if only for fleeting moments. The heavens appeared to be waging war upon themselves, with thunderclouds colliding in spectacular fashion. Their artillery, the booming thunder that shook the very foundations of the ancient forest. Rain poured down in torrents, not the gentle precipitation that nourishes the earth, but rather sheets of water that seemed intent on washing away everything in their path. The mighty trees, some hundreds of years old, swayed under the assault, their crowns groaning under the weight of accumulated water and wind. The forest floor, normally a carpet of fallen leaves and rich soil, had been transformed into a treacherous landscape of mud and standing water. Through this maelstrom of nature's fury, a solitary figure pressed forward with determined steps. This was no ordinary soldier struggling through the wilderness. This was President Ibrahim Traoré himself, separated from his team and deep into a covert mission that could determine the fate of his nation. His military boots sank deep into the mud with each step, making sucking sounds as he pulled them free to take the next stride. Water streamed from his uniform in rivulets, pooling at his feet whenever he paused. Yet despite the harsh conditions, there was a certain steadiness to his movements, a resolution that spoke of a man who had faced hardship before and emerged victorious. In his weathered hands, President Traoré clutched a specialized, encrypted radio device, its small screen illuminated with a faint green glow. Every few minutes he would check it, hoping for a signal, some connection to the team he had left behind. But the storm had proven too powerful for the delicate electronic communications. The mountains of interference generated by the lightning strikes had rendered all his attempts at contact futile. His team, positioned just a few kilometers behind him, had encountered their own disaster. The heavy rains had triggered a landslide of red clay and loose rocks, effectively trapping their vehicles and cutting off any possibility of quick extraction or support. For all intents and purposes, Ibrahim Traoré was completely alone in one of the most dangerous regions of his country. But it was not fear that gleamed in his eyes as another lightning bolt illuminated his weathered face. It was something deeper, a profound sense of duty mixed with grim determination. He knew these forests well, knew their secrets and their dangers. This was not merely a collection of trees and wildlife. This jungle had become a haven for enemies of the state, for those who would plunder Burkina Faso's natural wealth and leave her people destitute. For the past 6 months, intelligence reports had been filtering into the presidential office with increasing frequency and alarm. Foreign agencies operating under the cover of legitimate mining operations were systematically looting the country's natural resources. Gold, in particular, was being extracted from deep within the mountains and smuggled out on unmarked vessels before anyone in the government could intervene or claim their rightful share. Tonight, however, Ibrahim had come close to uncovering the truth. Tonight, he would find the evidence that could expose this vast criminal network and bring those responsible to justice. It was a mission that went beyond politics or economics. It was about the very sovereignty of his nation. Taking shelter beneath the spreading branches of an ancient mahogany tree, he crouched low and pulled out a waterlogged map from his jacket. The paper was nearly transparent with moisture, the ink running in places, making it difficult to read the topographical markings. If the signal were working properly, we should be heading north, he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the drumming rain. He traced a finger along what he hoped was their current position, but the map had deteriorated so badly that only water stains remained visible in many areas. Looking up at the turbulent sky, Ibrahim watched as another massive lightning bolt tore through the clouds. In that brief moment of illumination, lasting perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, he caught sight of something moving in the distance, between the trees. His hand instinctively moved to the rifle slung across his shoulder, his military training taking over. At first he assumed it was enemy patrol, perhaps scouts from the illegal mining operation he was tracking. His fingers found the familiar contours of his weapon, and he prepared himself for potential combat. But then, cutting through the sound of rain and thunder, came a sound that froze him in place. It was a scream, but not human. It was the cry of a mother, yet from a creature of a different kind. The sound carried within it multiple layers of emotion, pain, desperation, fear, and above all, a pleading quality that transcended species. It was the universal language of a parent in distress. Ibrahim's military instincts warred with his human compassion. Every second counted in his mission. The intelligence he sought could disappear if he delayed. Yet his feet, seemingly of their own accord, began moving toward the source of that heart-wrenching cry. He was a soldier, yes, but he was also a man with a soul that could not ignore such raw anguish. He pushed deeper into the forest, using the periodic flashes of lightning to navigate through the dense undergrowth. Branches whipped at his face, leaving stinging scratches, but he pressed on. The rain intensified, if such a thing were possible, creating a curtain of water that made visibility almost zero. Then, through the deluge, he witnessed a scene that would be forever seared into his memory. A family of gorillas was engaged in a desperate struggle against the forces of nature. What had been a gentle stream during the dry season had transformed into a raging torrent, its waters brown with displaced soil and debris. The normally docile waterway had become a killer, its current strong enough to sweep away anything in its path. A female gorilla, her black fur plastered to her body by the rain, was frantically trying to maintain her grip on her infant. The baby, no more than a few months old, clung to its mother with tiny fingers, its eyes wide with terror. The mother had positioned herself on a partially submerged log, using it as a precarious bridge to safety. But the wood was slick with moss and algae, made even more treacherous by the constant flow of water over its surface. On a large boulder jutting from the churning water stood the male, the silverback of the family. He was an impressive specimen, easily 300 pounds of pure muscle, his silver-gray back marking him as the mature leader of his troop. He beat his chest with thunderous impacts, roaring into the storm as if challenging the very forces of nature themselves. It was the cry of a father watching his family in mortal danger and feeling utterly helpless to prevent it. Ibrahim watched, transfixed, as the drama unfolded before him. He wanted to help, but what could one man do against the fury of a flash flood? He took a step forward, then hesitated. Gorillas were peaceful by nature, but a male protecting his family would see any human as a threat. His moment of hesitation proved costly. A massive surge of water, pushed by the breaking of a natural dam upstream, came roaring down the channel. It struck with the force of a battering ram, a wall of brown water carrying broken branches, rocks, and mud. The female gorilla screamed as she felt her perch give way beneath her. Everything happened in slow motion, yet far too fast to prevent. The mother's grip on the log failed. Her arms, powerful enough to bend small trees, could not maintain their hold against the slippery surface and the immense force of the water. She fell sideways into the torrent, still clutching her baby. For a heartbeat, they disappeared beneath the churning surface. Then the mother's head broke through, her mouth open in a soundless scream. But her arms were empty. The infant had been torn from her grasp by the unforgiving current. The tiny gorilla appeared briefly, its small form tumbling in the rapids like a leaf in a gutter. Its arms flailed helplessly, seeking purchase on something, anything. Then it was gone, pulled under by the muddy waters, swallowed by the flood as if it had never existed. The roar that erupted from the male silverback was unlike anything Ibrahim had ever heard. It was not mere sound. It was pure distilled anguish given voice. It was the cry of every parent who has ever watched their child suffer and been powerless to stop it. It transcended species, language, and understanding. It was simply grief. The female, having managed to pull herself onto the bank, lay there motionless, staring at the point where her baby had vanished. Her chest heaved with exertion and shock. Water streamed from her face. Whether it was rain or tears, Ibrahim could not tell. Perhaps it was both. For a long moment, President Ibrahim Traoré simply stood there, frozen by the scene he had witnessed. He had come into this jungle hunting enemies of the state, tracking those who would steal from his people. He had been prepared for combat, for danger, for betrayal. But he had not been prepared for this, for the raw, honest pain of a mother who had just lost her child. In that instant, all his military training, all his political calculations, all his strategic thinking fell away. Before him were not animals, not wildlife to be observed and catalogued. Before him was a family torn apart by tragedy, their suffering as real and profound as that of any human family. He made a decision then, one that would change everything. Slowly, deliberately, he unslung his rifle and placed it gently on the ground. The weapon settled into the mud with a soft squelch, no longer a tool of war, but merely an object of metal and wood. Ibrahim rose from his crouch and took a careful step forward. "This forest," he whispered to himself, his words lost in the rain, "is not just made of trees. It is made of hearts as well." The rain continued its relentless assault. But in that moment, it seemed as if the entire jungle had fallen silent. Even the thunder seemed to pause, as if nature itself were holding its breath to witness what would happen next. Here, in this remote corner of Burkina Faso, a bridge was being built between species, between worlds, between the human and the wild. It was a moment that would define not just the night, but everything that followed. The rain's fury had not diminished, but somehow its roar seemed distant now, as if Ibrahim's entire world had narrowed to this small clearing beside the raging stream. His breathing was heavy, his uniform thoroughly soaked, but he barely noticed these discomforts. His attention was fixed entirely on the scene of devastation before him. The female gorilla had pulled herself fully onto the muddy bank now. She sat there, her powerful frame looking somehow diminished by grief, staring at the churning water where her infant had disappeared. Every few seconds her head would turn slightly, following the current downstream as if hoping against hope that somehow her baby would reappear, would crawl out of the water and back into her arms. The male silverback's roars had subsided into a lower, more guttural sound. Not quite a growl, not quite a moan. His massive hands, capable of bending metal bars, now alternated between beating his chest and reaching toward the sky, as if pleading with some higher power for an answer, for justice, for mercy. Ibrahim took another cautious step forward. The mud sucked at his boots, reaching almost to his knees in places. The weapon he had abandoned lay behind him now, a conscious choice that left him vulnerable, but also showed his intentions were peaceful. He understood, on an instinctive level that transcended his military training, that approaching this family with a weapon in hand would be seen as a threat, not as help. He moved slowly, deliberately, making sure each footstep was visible and predictable. With every step, water splashed upward, the sound cutting through the ambient noise of the storm. The male gorilla's head swiveled toward him immediately, those intelligent eyes locking onto the approaching human. Lips curled back, revealing impressive canine teeth, a warning that needed no translation. Ibrahim stopped immediately. He had seen enough of animal behavior, both in documentaries and during his time in these forests, to understand the message: come closer and face the consequences. Slowly, keeping his movements smooth and non-threatening, Ibrahim raised both hands, palms outward and facing upward toward the rain-filled sky. It was a gesture as old as humanity itself, the universal sign of peaceful intentions, the same gesture soldiers use on battlefields around the world to signal that they mean no harm. "I am not your enemy," Ibrahim said softly, his voice barely carrying over the sound of the rain. "I am a friend." The words themselves were meaningless to the gorilla, of course. Gorillas do not speak French or any human language. But tone, inflection, the quality of a voice, these are universal. The softness in Ibrahim's voice, the gentle cadence of his speech, carried a message that transcended language barriers. The silverback's aggressive display diminished slightly. His lips covered his teeth, though his posture remained tense, coiled like a spring ready to release. He was not yet convinced, but he was listening, watching, evaluating this strange human who approached not with weapons, but with open hands. The female gorilla looked at Ibrahim then, really looked at him. Her eyes, so human in their expressiveness, glistened with moisture that could not be entirely attributed to the rain. In that gaze, Ibrahim saw something that cut through all the barriers of species and evolution. He saw a mother's grief, pure and undiluted. For several heartbeats, the world seemed to hold its breath. The rain continued to fall, the stream continued to rage, but in that small clearing, time felt suspended. It was a moment of decision, a pivot point where nature would determine whether to trust this human intruder or to drive him away. Ibrahim remained perfectly still, hands raised, barely daring to breathe. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, not from fear, but from the profound significance of this moment. He understood somehow that what happened next would matter, would ripple outward in ways he could not yet comprehend. Finally, slowly, Ibrahim began to lower himself to a kneeling position. His uniform disappeared into the mud as he sank down, lowering his height, making himself less threatening. Then, in a gesture of deep respect, he bowed his head forward, as if in prayer or supplication. This was a language the forest understood. In the kingdom of gorillas, as in many animal societies, those who bow down show submission, show that they do not come to challenge or threaten. It was an ancient ritual, this lowering of one's self, and it carried meaning across species lines. The silverback watched this display with what might have been surprise. Slowly, incrementally, he took a step backward, then another. His massive form relaxed slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing. He was still watchful, still protective, but the immediate threat level had diminished. Ibrahim raised his eyes without lifting his head, maintaining his humble posture while observing what happened next. The female had turned her attention away from the water and back to something in her arms. With trembling hands, she was cradling a small, limp form against her chest. The baby. Somehow, impossibly, the infant gorilla had washed back to shore, or perhaps the mother had managed to retrieve it from the torrent. But as Ibrahim's eyes adjusted to the scene before him, his heart sank. The tiny creature was not moving. Its small arms hung limply, caked in mud. The face, which should have been alert and curious in the way of all infant primates, was slack and still. Ibrahim felt a sharp pain in his chest, a physical reaction to the sight of such innocent suffering. He knew that nature could be cruel, that death was a part of the forest's endless cycle. But he also knew something else. He knew that sometimes, just sometimes, fate brings us to places not by accident, but for a reason. Perhaps, he whispered to himself, I was brought here for something other than my original mission. He began to move forward again, even more slowly than before. Every muscle in his body was tensed, ready to throw himself backward if the silverback charged. But he felt compelled to move forward, drawn by something stronger than his sense of self-preservation. The female gorilla did not try to stop him. In fact, in a gesture that would haunt Ibrahim for the rest of his life, she did the unthinkable. She looked away. She averted her eyes from her baby as if she could no longer bear to look at what she had lost. It was the gesture of a mother who had exhausted every option, every hope, and was now surrendering to the inevitable. It was as if she was saying, I have failed. Perhaps you can do what I could not. Ibrahim reached the small family unit, close enough now to see every detail. The infant gorilla, barely the size of a human toddler, lay completely still. Its tiny chest showed no signs of movement, no rise and fall of breath. The lips were slightly parted, water dripping from the mouth and nose. The eyes were closed. For a moment, Ibrahim's military pragmatism warred with his compassion. He was a president, a leader of a nation, on a critical mission. Every second he delayed here was a second his enemies gained. The intelligence he sought might slip through his fingers like water through cupped hands. His duty was clear. Yet as he looked at that small, lifeless form, another voice spoke in his heart, one that had nothing to do with duty or mission parameters. There is still hope, the voice whispered. It is not yet too late. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, leader of millions, had faced down military coups, political intrigue, and threats to his life with steady nerves and unwavering resolve. But as he rolled up his sleeves and lowered himself to his knees beside that tiny gorilla infant, he found himself trembling. The silverback growled again, a deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. But this time Ibrahim sensed it was not entirely a sound of aggression. It was the sound of a father waiting, watching, hoping against hope that this strange human might possess some power, some knowledge that could bring back what had been lost. Ibrahim looked up at the stormy sky, rain streaming down his face, and spoke softly, "O Creator, if it is your will, then even an animal's child can be saved by human hands." Then he placed both his hands on the small chest of the infant gorilla, feeling the cold, wet fur beneath his palms. He pressed down gently, testing, evaluating. There was no response, no movement, no sign of life. But Ibrahim Traoré had not become president of his nation by accepting defeat easily. And so, there in the mud and rain, in a forest clearing lit only by lightning, surrounded by grieving gorillas and far from any other human soul, he began to fight for a life that was not his own species, not his own concern by any rational measure, but which had somehow become the most important thing in his world. The battle for the baby gorilla's life had begun. The rain continued its merciless assault on the forest, creating a constant white noise that enveloped the small clearing. But for Ibrahim, the world had shrunk to a single point of focus, the tiny, still form beneath his hands. He had no formal medical training beyond the basic field medicine taught to all military officers. He had never treated an animal, let alone attempted to resuscitate a gorilla infant. But he understood the fundamentals of life, breath and heartbeat. If he could restore those two things, perhaps the baby still had a chance. Ibrahim positioned his hands carefully on the infant's chest. The ribcage felt incredibly delicate beneath his fingers, so small and fragile compared to the massive forms of the adult gorillas watching him. He was acutely aware that too much pressure could cause further damage. But too little would be ineffective. He began chest compressions, counting steadily in his head. 1, 2, 3, 4. His voice emerged as barely more than a whisper, his words swallowed by the storm. Press, release. Press, release. He maintained a steady rhythm, trying to remember everything he had learned about CPR, hoping desperately that the principles were similar across species. The female gorilla had lowered herself to the ground as well, assuming a kneeling position that mirrored Ibrahim's own. Her eyes were fixed on his hands, on the movement of his fingers as they pressed rhythmically against her baby's chest. She made soft sounds, clicking and humming noises that seemed to be a gorilla mother's lullaby or prayer. The silverback stood to one side, his huge form creating a shelter from the worst of the rain. His breath came in great huffing sounds, clouds of vapor visible despite the warmth of the tropical night. Every muscle in his body remained tense, ready to intervene if this human did anything that seemed harmful to his offspring. Ibrahim's arms began to ache after the first few dozen compressions. His uniform was so thoroughly soaked that it clung to him like a second skin, adding weight to his movements. Mud had worked its way into every crease and fold of fabric, making every motion slightly more difficult. But he did not stop, could not stop. In his heart, a prayer formed, not in the formal language of mosques or churches, but in the simple, honest plea of one soul to another. Lord, I am just a man, but this baby is your creation. Give back its life. After completing another set of compressions, Ibrahim gently tilted the infant's head back, opening the airway. He placed his mouth over the small nose and mouth of the gorilla, feeling the strange texture of fur against his lips, and breathed out gently, not too hard. An infant's lungs were delicate, whether human or gorilla, just enough to hopefully inflate the lungs, to bring oxygen to starved cells. The forest fell silent around them. Even the rain seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if this impossible act of cross-species compassion could succeed. It was a moment when the natural order itself seemed to pause, as if all of creation were watching to see if life could be brought back from the very edge of death. But the baby did not respond. No cough, no gasp, no sudden intake of breath. The tiny chest remained still beneath Ibrahim's hands. He resumed compressions with renewed intensity. 1, 2, 3, 4. Press harder this time, but not too hard. Find the balance between effective and harmful. His own breathing was becoming labored, the physical and emotional exertion taking their toll. The silverback made a sound then, a deep vocalization that sent vibrations through the ground. It was not exactly a growl, nor was it aggressive. If Ibrahim had to put human words to it, he might have called it encouragement, or perhaps a plea. The mighty animal who could have torn Ibrahim apart with casual ease, instead stood there as a supplicant, begging this human to succeed where nature had failed. Ibrahim's clothes, his face, everything was covered in mud by now. Rain dripped from his eyebrows into his eyes, but he did not pause to wipe it away. His hands moved with machine-like precision. Compress, compress, compress. Every 15 compressions, he would stop to deliver another gentle breath into the infant's lungs. 10 cycles. 15, 20. His muscles burned with fatigue. His back ached from being hunched over. Doubts began to creep into his mind. Was he simply delaying the inevitable? Had the infant been without oxygen for too long? Had the cold water already caused irreversible damage? But then he remembered the countless times in his political career when success had seemed impossible, when his enemies had surrounded him, when defeat had appeared certain. He had not given up then, and he would not give up now. Just a little more, he muttered to himself, to the baby, to the watching parents, to whatever powers might be listening. Hold on just a little more. He performed another cycle of compressions, then leaned down to administer another breath. As he sealed his mouth around the infant's nose and mouth and exhaled gently, he sent every ounce of his will along with that breath, as if pure determination could restart a stopped heart and refill empty lungs. And then, movement. It was so slight that for a moment Ibrahim thought he had imagined it. But no, there it was again. The tiny arm twitched. The fingers, which had been hanging limp, suddenly curled inward slightly, as if grasping at something invisible. Ibrahim's heart leaped. He pulled back, his eyes fixed on the infant's face with an intensity that shut out everything else in the world. The small chest rose, barely a millimeter, but it rose. Then, faintly, he heard it, a cough. Just a small sound, barely audible, but unmistakable. Water dribbled from the corner of the baby's mouth as another cough, stronger this time, racked the small body. The eyes, which had been closed, flickered open briefly before shutting again. The female gorilla's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. She let out a cry, not of anguish this time, but of joy so pure and overwhelming that it seemed to shake the very trees. She surged forward on her knuckles, her powerful arms propelling her toward her baby with desperate speed. Ibrahim immediately rolled backward, away from the infant, his hands raised high in a gesture of both surrender and offering. His message was clear. This is your child. Take them back. The mother scooped up her baby with infinite gentleness, cradling the tiny form against her massive chest. She began rocking back and forth, making soft clicking sounds as her fingers carefully checked every part of her infant's body, reassuring herself that her child was truly alive, truly breathing. The silverback looked up at the sky and released a roar that echoed through the forest canopy, scattering nightbirds and causing monkeys in distant trees to chitter nervously. But this roar was different from the one before. This was not anguish or rage. This was triumph. This was gratitude. This was the sound of a father whose world had been shattered and then, impossibly, restored. A strange peace settled over the clearing. The rain, which had been so violent just minutes before, was beginning to ease. The drumming on the leaves became gentler, more like a lullaby than a punishment. Through breaks in the clouds, faint hints of golden light appeared, the first suggestions that somewhere beyond the storm, dawn was approaching. Ibrahim sat back in the mud, his legs sprawled in front of him, and allowed himself to simply breathe. His chest heaved with exertion, his hands trembled from sustained effort, and he could feel every year of his age in his aching muscles. But none of that mattered. A smile, unbidden and genuine, spread across his muddy face. Life never disappoints, he whispered to himself. It only tests. But even in this moment of triumph, reality could not be held at bay forever. Ibrahim's eyes fell to the watch on his wrist, its waterproof face still functioning despite the deluge. The hands told a story he did not want to read but could not ignore. 3 hours had passed. 3 crucial hours during which his target had undoubtedly moved, regrouped, or possibly escaped entirely. The mission he had risked everything for, the intelligence operation that could expose the theft of his nation's resources, was quite possibly lost. His team would have given him up for dead by now, or at least for hopelessly off course. The coordinates where he was supposed to intercept the smuggling operation would be cold. The trail vanished like footprints in the rain. Ibrahim looked up at the sky, where the clouds were beginning to break apart, revealing patches of star-studded darkness beyond. He spoke softly, as if addressing the universe itself. If this was nature's test of me as a man, then I have passed. But if this was a test of me as a warrior, then the outcome is still unclear. The rain had reduced to a drizzle now, individual droplets falling from leaves rather than the crushing downpour of before. The storm was passing, leaving behind a world that felt somehow cleansed, renewed. The female gorilla, still cradling her infant, looked at Ibrahim with what could only be described as recognition. Not just acknowledgement, but actual recognition. The understanding that what had passed between them was sacred, was meaningful, was something that would bind them across the species divide for as long as they both lived. The baby coughed again, more strongly this time. Its little lungs inflated properly, and it let out a sound, not quite a cry, more like a surprised squeak, as if the infant were shocked to find itself still alive. The mother pulled her baby even closer, wrapping her massive arms completely around the tiny form, creating a fortress of flesh and bone to protect against any further harm. The silverback approached Ibrahim slowly. There was no aggression in his movement now, only a careful deliberation. He stopped a few feet away, his bulk towering over the sitting human. For a long moment, the 2 males, one human, one gorilla, simply regarded each other. Then the silverback did something that would remain etched in Ibrahim's memory forever. He raised one massive fist and struck his chest 3 times. The sound boomed through the clearing like drum beats, deep and resonant. It was not the aggressive chest-beating display used to intimidate rivals. This was something different, something ritual. Then the gorilla turned and, with one of his arms, pointed toward a specific direction in the forest, toward a gap between trees that led deeper into the jungle, toward terrain that Ibrahim's map had marked as unexplored. Ibrahim's eyes widened. This was not random behavior. Animals did not make pointing gestures without purpose. The silverback was trying to communicate something, was trying to show him something. The great ape repeated the gesture, more emphatically this time. He pointed to the gap in the trees, then looked back at Ibrahim, as if to make absolutely certain the message had been received. In those intelligent eyes, Ibrahim saw what he could only describe as deliberate communication. Slowly, Ibrahim rose to his feet, his joints protesting after sitting in the cold mud. He bowed his head toward the gorilla family, a gesture of respect and farewell. "I understand," he said softly. "Thank you." The female picked up her baby, securing the infant against her chest in a way that would prevent any further accidents. The silverback placed a hand on her shoulder, in a gesture that was remarkably human in its tenderness. Then the family began to move away, melting back into the jungle from which they had come. But before disappearing entirely, the silverback turned back one final time. He looked at Ibrahim, tilted his head slightly, then nodded, an unmistakable gesture of permission, perhaps even of blessing. Ibrahim watched them until they vanished completely into the green shadows. The rain had stopped entirely now, leaving only the sound of water dripping from countless leaves, creating a gentle percussion that was almost musical. He retrieved his rifle from where he had abandoned it in the mud, slinging it back over his shoulder. From his belt, he pulled out a compass, wiping the moisture from its face. The needle swung briefly before settling, pointing north. But Ibrahim adjusted his orientation, pointing himself instead toward the gap in the trees where the gorilla had gestured. "Perhaps," he said to himself as he began walking, "my mission is not over." Perhaps it is only now truly beginning. He did not know what he would find in that direction. He did not know if the gorilla's gesture had been coincidence or something more. But Ibrahim Traoré had learned long ago to trust his instincts. And every instinct he had was screaming that this was important, that fate had led him to this moment for a reason. As he walked into the unknown, Ibrahim found himself thinking about the interconnectedness of all things. He had come into this forest hunting criminals who stole from his nation. He had saved the life of a baby gorilla out of compassion. And now that same gorilla's father was showing him a path he would never have found on his own. Was it simply coincidence? Or was there something deeper at work? Some force that wove together the threads of life into patterns too complex for human minds to fully grasp? Ibrahim did not have the answer. But as he pushed aside hanging vines and stepped carefully over exposed roots, heading deeper into the wilderness, he felt a strange certainty building within him. Whatever lay ahead, it was meant to be found. His path and his mission, his compassion and his duty, were all converging toward a single point. The forest, which had seemed so hostile just hours before, now felt different. The trees were no longer obstacles but guides. The sounds of wildlife were not threats but companions. He was no longer an intruder in this green realm, but something else, a guest, perhaps, or even an ally. And so President Ibrahim Traoré, his uniform filthy with mud, his body exhausted, but his spirit burning bright with purpose, walked into the depths of the Zubi forest. Behind him lay a miracle. Ahead of him lay a truth that would shake the foundations of his nation. The night was not yet over. The real test was still to come. The forest had transformed in the aftermath of the storm. What had been a chaotic maze of water and wind was now settling into an eerie calm. Mist rose from the wet earth, creating ghostly tendrils that wove between tree trunks. The air smelled of wet earth, crushed vegetation, and that particular freshness that follows heavy rain. Ibrahim moved carefully through this transformed landscape, following the direction the silverback had indicated. His boots squelched in the mud with each step, leaving deep impressions that would be gone by morning, washed away by morning dew and jungle growth. Every few minutes he would check his compass, making sure he maintained his bearing toward the northeast. The terrain began to change gradually. The dense clustering of ancient trees gave way to a more scattered arrangement. The ground became rockier, with outcroppings of stone pushing through the thin soil. This was a transition zone, Ibrahim realized, the place where the lowland jungle forest met the beginning of the mountainous regions. It was also, he noted with growing interest, an area that had been marked as uninhabited and largely unexplored on his maps. No villages, no roads, no recorded human activity. The perfect place to hide something. After about 2 hours of steady walking, Ibrahim began to hear something that made him freeze in his tracks. It was faint at first, so subtle that he thought he might be imagining it. But as he stood perfectly still, slowing even his breathing to absolute silence, he heard it again. A mechanical hum. It was the distinctive sound of generators running. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest settlement, someone was running heavy machinery. Ibrahim's military training immediately reasserted itself. He dropped into a low crouch, moving now with the careful precision of a soldier in enemy territory. Each step was placed carefully, avoiding dry branches that might crack or loose stones that might clatter. He became a shadow among shadows, visible only if one knew exactly where to look. The sound grew gradually louder as he approached. Along with the generator hum, he could now hear voices, distant, but definitely human. There was also the clank of metal on stone, the rumble of heavy vehicles, and the unmistakable beeping of construction equipment backing up. Ibrahim climbed a small rise, moving from tree to tree, using every available cover. At the top, he carefully lowered himself onto his stomach and crawled the last few meters to the edge, where the ground dropped away suddenly into a hidden valley. What he saw below made his blood run cold. The valley had been completely camouflaged from aerial view by the dense canopy overhead. But at ground level, it was a hive of activity. Massive lights, powered by the generators he had heard, illuminated the area with harsh yellow glare. Dozens of men moved about with purposeful efficiency, all wearing matching uniforms that were definitely not Burkina military issue. But it was what they were doing that made Ibrahim's hands clench into fists. They were mining, not the small-scale artisanal mining that was legal and common in the region. This was an industrial operation. Heavy machinery bit into the earth, extracting tons of soil that was then processed through portable refineries. And everywhere catching the light was the unmistakable glint of gold. Ibrahim pulled out his binoculars, adjusting the focus to get a clearer view. What he saw confirmed his worst fears and exceeded them. This was not just a theft. It was a systematic plundering of his nation's wealth on a scale he had never imagined. Workers loaded gold ore onto large trucks. Supervisors stood nearby with tablets and clipboards, recording quantities with the efficiency of a legitimate business operation. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their weapons modern military-grade rifles, not the aging Kalashnikovs common in the region. But what caught Ibrahim's attention most were the vehicles and equipment. They bore logos and markings he recognized. International mining corporations, the kind that operated around the world with the blessing of governments and international regulatory bodies. Except this operation had no blessing from the government of Burkina Faso because the government had no idea it existed. Through his binoculars, Ibrahim could read some of the text on the equipment. Global Resources Mining Division was emblazoned on the side of one large truck. He had heard that name before. They were one of the corporations that had approached his government about legal mining partnerships. But those negotiations had broken down months ago when his administration had demanded better terms for Burkina Faso. Apparently, Global Resources had decided to proceed without permission. Ibrahim's jaw tightened as anger welled up inside him. This was not just theft, it was colonialism in a new form. Foreign powers had been plundering Africa's wealth for centuries. And here it was happening again, right under his nose, hidden beneath the jungle canopy. He began taking photographs with the small camera built into his encrypted communication device. Each click captured evidence that would be crucial: the equipment, the gold, the corporate logos, the armed guards. This was proof that would stand up in any international court. But as he was focusing on a particularly clear shot of the operations command center, his foot shifted slightly. A small stone, loosened by the rain, tumbled down the slope. It was a tiny sound in the grand scheme of things, barely audible over the generators and machinery, but one of the guards below had sharp ears. Ibrahim saw the man's head snap up, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. The guard said something into a radio handset, and immediately 2 other guards began moving toward the slope, weapons at the ready. Ibrahim cursed silently and began to belly crawl backward, away from the edge. But the damage was done. He had been spotted, or at least his position had been compromised. He could hear the guards climbing up through the undergrowth, their flashlight beams cutting through the mist. He had 2 choices: retreat and lose the opportunity to gather more intelligence, or stay and risk capture. But there was a third option, one that was far more dangerous but might yield the most valuable intelligence of all. He could get closer. Ibrahim made his decision in an instant. He pulled out his transmitter and quickly tapped out a coded message using the emergency frequency he had memorized. "This is President Traoré. Target located. Coordinates following. Industrial-scale illegal mining operation. Foreign involvement confirmed. Request immediate backup. Maintain radio silence until further contact." He encoded the GPS coordinates of his location and hit send. The message was compressed and encrypted, transmitted in a burst so quick that it would be nearly impossible to trace. Whether it would get through the interference from the storm in the mountains was another question. But it was the best he could do. Then Ibrahim began to move. Not away from the operation, but parallel to it, circling around to find a better vantage point. If he was going to risk everything, he needed to see as much as possible. Ibrahim moved like a ghost through the forest, using every skill he had learned during his military career. The guards were behind him now, searching in the wrong direction. He had bought himself some time, but not much. As he circled around the hidden valley, he began to see the true scope of the operation. This was not a recent development. This had been going on for months, possibly years. There were permanent structures, metal buildings that served as barracks for the workers. A large command center with satellite communications equipment. even a landing pad for helicopters. The organization and resources required for something like this were staggering. This was not some ragtag group of smugglers. This was corporate-backed, possibly with the support of foreign governments who conveniently looked the other way as their companies looted other nations. Ibrahim found a new position on the opposite side of the valley, concealed behind a fallen tree covered in moss and ferns. From here, he had a perfect view of the command center. Through his binoculars, he could see inside through the windows. Men in business casual clothing sat at computers and workstations, tracking yields and shipment schedules just like any other mining operation. But then Ibrahim saw something that made his blood boil even more. In a corner of the command center, away from the main work area, was a separate room with glass walls. Inside, he could see maps spread across a large table, and those maps showed not just this location but others, marked with red dots across Burkina Faso and neighboring countries. This was not an isolated operation. This was part of a network. As Ibrahim watched, a man entered the glass room. He was older, perhaps in his 60s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone used to authority. He wore expensive outdoor gear, the kind that cost more than most Burkinabés earned in a year. He stood at the maps, pointing to various locations while others nodded and took notes. This, Ibrahim knew instinctively, was the man in charge. The architect of this theft, Ibrahim adjusted his camera, zooming in as much as possible. He needed clear photographs of this man's face. He needed evidence that could be used to track him down, no matter where in the world he might try to hide. Click, click, click. Each photograph was automatically saved and encrypted in the device's memory. Even if Ibrahim didn't make it out of here alive, the device was designed to transmit its contents automatically if it detected his vital signs had stopped. It was a grim contingency plan, but a necessary one. Suddenly, shouts erupted from the far side of the valley. The guards searching for the intruder had found something, probably Ibrahim's earlier position or his footprints. The entire operation went on alert. More guards emerged from the barracks, grabbing weapons. Lights began sweeping the forest perimeter. Ibrahim knew he had pushed his luck as far as it would go. It was time to leave. But as he began to ease backward from his hiding position, he heard something that made him pause. Voices. Close, too close. He froze, barely daring to breathe. Through the ferns and undergrowth, he could see two guards moving directly toward his position. They weren't searching randomly anymore. They were doing a systematic sweep of the entire perimeter. Ibrahim's hand moved slowly to his rifle. He had hoped to avoid violence, to remain a ghost who gathered intelligence and disappeared. But if he was cornered, he would have to fight. And once shooting started, any hope of escape would evaporate. The guards came closer, their flashlight beams cutting through the mist. Ibrahim could hear their radio communications. They were speaking French with West African accents. Former colonial soldiers, perhaps, now working as mercenaries for corporate interests. One guard was now less than 10 meters away. His flashlight beam swept back and forth, methodically checking every shadow, every potential hiding spot. In seconds, that beam would fall on Ibrahim's position, and the alarm would be raised. Ibrahim's finger moved to his trigger. He didn't want to shoot. Didn't want to kill men who were probably just trying to earn a living in a world with few opportunities. But he was the president of Burkina Faso, and he carried information that could expose one of the largest theft operations in his nation's history. His personal feelings had to be secondary to his duty. The flashlight beam swung closer. 5 meters, 4 meters, and then, from somewhere deep in the jungle, came a sound that Ibrahim recognized immediately. The roar of a silverback gorilla. The guards froze, their heads whipping around toward the source of the sound. The flashlight beam swung away from Ibrahim's position, pointing instead into the darker recesses of the forest. What was that? One guard asked nervously in French. Probably just an animal, the other replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Another roar, closer this time, powerful enough to make the air vibrate, primal enough to trigger instinctive fear in any human who heard it. "That's no ordinary animal," the first guard said. "That's a gorilla. A big one." "Gorillas don't attack humans," the second guard said. but he was backing away from the forest edge, back toward the lighted area of the operation. "Tell that to the gorilla," the first guard muttered, following his companion's retreat. Ibrahim lay perfectly still, scarcely believing what had just happened. That roar had not been random. That roar had been deliberate, timed perfectly to draw attention away from his position. The silverback, the same one whose infant he had saved, was somehow tracking him, protecting him. It was impossible. It defied everything rational, and yet it had happened. As the guards retreated back toward the operations center, Ibrahim seized his chance. He began moving quickly but quietly, putting distance between himself and the compound. Behind him, he could hear more shouts, more confusion as the entire security force tried to determine if they were under attack by an aggressive animal or by human intruders. Ibrahim moved deeper into the forest, climbing up and away from the valley. His lungs burned with exertion, his legs ached from the constant strain, but he didn't dare stop. Not yet. Not until he had put enough distance between himself and that place. After 20 minutes of hard climbing, he finally allowed himself to pause, taking shelter beneath an overhanging rock formation. He pulled out his transmitter and checked the signal. Weak but present. He began encoding another message, this one much longer, containing everything he had seen and photographed. As he worked, he became aware of a presence nearby. His hand went to his weapon, but he did not draw it. Somehow, he knew what he would see. In the darkness between the trees, 2 eyes reflected the faint glow of his transmitter screen. Large eyes, intelligent eyes. The silverback was there, keeping watch. Ibrahim finished his transmission and hit send. The device confirmed the message had been received by the secure military network. Backup would be coming, but it would take hours for forces to mobilize and reach this remote location. "Thank you," Ibrahim said softly, speaking to the darkness where the gorilla watched. "You've saved my life twice now in one night." There was no response, of course. But the eyes blinked once, slowly, and Ibrahim could have sworn there was understanding in that simple gesture. Then the silverback melted back into the jungle, silent despite his massive size. Ibrahim was alone again, but he no longer felt isolated. He was part of something larger now, connected to this forest and its inhabitants in a way that transcended normal human experience. He settled in to wait for dawn and for the arrival of his forces. The night was not over, but the mission, the real mission, was almost complete. Soon the world would know what was happening here. Soon justice would come to this hidden valley. Ibrahim allowed himself a small smile. He had come into this forest hunting criminals. He had stayed to save a life. And in doing so, he had found what he was looking for all along. Sometimes, he reflected, the path to truth required us to follow our hearts rather than our maps. Sometimes compassion led us exactly where we needed to be, even if we didn't know it at the time. The forest around him was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures resuming their routines now that the storm had passed. Somewhere in that darkness, a gorilla family slept peacefully, their infant safe and warm. And somewhere below, criminals continued their work, unaware that their enterprise had been discovered and documented. Ibrahim closed his eyes and allowed himself to rest, just for a moment. At dawn, everything would change. At dawn, the real battle would begin. But for now, in this quiet moment before the storm of consequences broke, Ibrahim Traoré felt at peace. He had been tested as a man, as a leader, as a human being capable of compassion, even in the midst of duty, and he had not been found wanting. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the jungle canopy, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The night's violence had given way to a serene beauty that seemed almost mocking given what had transpired. But nature, Ibrahim had learned, was indifferent to human concerns. It simply was, continuing its eternal cycle regardless of the dramas playing out beneath its green roof. Ibrahim had not slept, could not sleep. Every sound in the darkness had been a potential threat, every snap of a twig a possible enemy approaching. But more than that, his mind was racing with plans and contingencies. He had the evidence, had transmitted the coordinates. Now he needed to ensure that evidence got into the right hands, and that the operation below was shut down permanently. As the light strengthened, he heard a sound that sent relief flooding through his exhausted body, the distant thump of helicopter rotors. Not just one, but several approaching from different directions. The military had received his transmission and was responding in force. Ibrahim pulled out a signal flare from his pack, one of the few pieces of emergency equipment he had kept with him throughout the night. He ignited it, sending a brilliant red spark high into the air. The flare arced above the treetops, marking his position clearly for the incoming aircraft. The response was immediate. One helicopter altered course, heading directly for his location. Through the trees, Ibrahim could see it was a military transport, the kind used for deploying special forces teams. The sight of it brought a surge of pride. These were his soldiers, his people, coming to defend their nation's sovereignty. The helicopter couldn't land in the dense forest, but it hovered above a small clearing about 50 meters from Ibrahim's position. Ropes dropped from the doors, and within seconds, soldiers were fast roping down, hitting the ground in combat-ready positions. Ibrahim emerged from his hiding place, arms raised so they could see he was friendly. The team leader, a captain he recognized from briefings, immediately snapped to attention. "Mr. President, we've been searching for you all night." "There's no time for formalities, Captain," Ibrahim said urgently. "There's an illegal mining operation in the valley below us. Major foreign involvement. I need your team to secure the perimeter while the other units move in for arrest operations." The captain nodded, already speaking into his radio headset, relaying Ibrahim's orders to the other incoming helicopters. Within minutes, the forest around the hidden valley was swarming with Burkina Faso special forces. Ibrahim led a squad to his observation point overlooking the operation. In the growing daylight, the scale of the theft was even more apparent. He could see now that there were multiple excavation sites, all connected by a network of rough roads hidden beneath camouflage netting. "My God," the captain breathed, seeing it for the first time. "How long has this been going on?" "Too long," Ibrahim replied grimly. "But it ends today." He picked up the captain's radio handset and switched to the command frequency. "This is President Traoré. All units are to move in simultaneously. Lethal force is authorized only in self-defense. I want everyone captured alive if possible. We need these people to testify about who authorized this operation." A chorus of acknowledgments came back over the radio. Ibrahim watched as, with military precision, special forces teams emerged from the jungle at multiple points around the valley perimeter. The reaction below was immediate and chaotic. Workers dropped their tools and raised their hands. Some of the armed guards tried to organize a defense, but they were overwhelmingly outnumbered and outgunned. A few warning shots fired into the air convinced most of them that resistance was futile. Within 20 minutes, the entire operation was secured. Hundreds of workers, supervisors, and security personnel sat on the ground with their hands secured behind their backs. Burkina Faso soldiers moved through the site, photographing everything, documenting every piece of equipment, every ounce of stolen gold. Ibrahim made his way down into the valley, the captain and a security detail surrounding him. He walked through the operation with growing anger, seeing up close just how extensive the theft had been. The portable refineries alone represented millions of dollars in equipment. The gold already processed and waiting for shipment would be worth tens of millions on the international market. And this was just one site. If the maps he had seen were accurate, there could be dozens more across the region. He made his way to the command center, where soldiers had already secured all the computers and documents. Inside the glass-walled conference room, sitting with his hands bound, was the silver-haired man Ibrahim had seen the night before. Ibrahim stood before him. This corporate executive who had thought himself above the laws of a nation he clearly considered inferior. The man met Ibrahim's gaze with a mixture of defiance and calculation, as if already planning his legal defense. "Do you know who I am?" Ibrahim asked quietly. "I know you're President Traoré," the man replied in accented French. "And I know you're making a mistake. My company has rights in this region. We have agreements." "You have nothing," Ibrahim interrupted, his voice hard as stone. "You have no agreements with the legitimate government of Burkina Faso. You are a thief, stealing from a sovereign nation. and you will face justice for it." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "You came to my country thinking you could take what you wanted because we were poor, because we were weak, because we were African. You thought we would never discover what you were doing. You were wrong on all counts." The man's confident facade cracked slightly. "You don't understand how the world works, Mr. President. My company has connections. Governments around the world depend on the resources we provide. This will be swept under the rug with a few apologies and perhaps a small fine." Ibrahim straightened, his expression one of cold certainty. "The world is changing. We are changing, and men like you, who profit from Africa's weakness, are going to learn that we are no longer willing to be victims." He turned to the captain. "Make sure every piece of evidence is cataloged. Every computer, every document, every receipt. I want a paper trail that leads all the way back to the corporate headquarters and to every government official who enabled this." "Yes, sir," the captain replied with evident satisfaction. Ibrahim walked out of the command center and stood in the middle of the operation site. Around him, soldiers were methodically dismantling the illegal infrastructure. The morning sun was fully up now, burning away the last of the mist, revealing everything that had been hidden in darkness. A soldier approached and saluted. "Sir, we've counted 948 individuals in custody. About 100 of them have foreign passports. The others are from various countries in West Africa, likely recruited as laborers." Ibrahim nodded. "The foreign nationals will be deported after questioning the local workers. Find out which ones were here voluntarily and which were coerced. Those who were forced to work will be released and helped. Those who collaborated willingly will face trial." "Understood, sir." As the soldier left to relay those orders, Ibrahim felt a presence behind him. He turned to find a young lieutenant holding a radio handset. "Sir, there's a call for you on the secure line. International media has somehow already gotten wind of this operation. They're requesting a statement." Ibrahim took the handset unsurprised. News traveled fast, especially news this significant. "This is President Traoré." The voice on the other end belonged to a BBC correspondent he had spoken with before. "Mr. President, we're hearing reports of a major raid on an illegal mining operation. Can you confirm?" Ibrahim looked around at the bustling scene of documentation and arrests. "I can confirm that forces under my command have shut down an extensive illegal mining operation that was stealing gold from Burkina Faso. Multiple foreign nationals have been taken into custody, and we have evidence of corporate and possibly governmental complicity from several countries. Full details will be released at a press conference in the capital tomorrow." "Can you tell us how you discovered this operation?" Ibrahim paused, his mind flashing back to the night before. To the storm, to the drowning infant, to the moment he chose compassion over mission efficiency, to the silverback's gesture pointing him in this direction. "Let's just say," he replied carefully, "that sometimes the path to truth requires us to follow unexpected guides. Sometimes justice comes from unexpected places." After ending the call, Ibrahim walked to the edge of the valley where the operation site met the undisturbed jungle. He stood there for a long moment, looking into the green depths. "Thank you," he said quietly, speaking to the forest itself, to whatever spirits or forces had guided him through this night. "Thank you for showing me the way." A sound made him turn. From the tree line, barely visible in the shadows, he caught a glimpse of a massive form, the silverback watching. Their eyes met across the distance, across the divide between human and animal, between civilization and wilderness. The gorilla raised one arm in what might have been a gesture of farewell, or perhaps it was simply stretching. Ibrahim would never know for certain. But he raised his own arm in response, a salute from one guardian to another. Then the silverback was gone, melting back into the forest with his family, returning to a world where human corruption and greed did not reach, a world that existed by older, purer laws. Ibrahim stood there for a long moment more, feeling the weight of what had been accomplished, but also the weight of what lay ahead. This discovery would have repercussions far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. There would be diplomatic incidents, international investigations, possibly even threats to his government. But it was worth it. For sovereignty, for justice, for the principle that no nation, no matter how small or poor, should have its wealth stolen while the world looked away. The captain approached again. Sir, the helicopters are ready to transport you back to the capital whenever you're ready. I imagine you'll want to clean up and rest before the press conference tomorrow." Ibrahim looked down at his uniform, caked in dried mud, torn in several places, stained with sweat and jungle debris. He probably looked like he had been through a war, which, in a sense, he had. "No," he said firmly. "I'm staying here until every piece of evidence is secured and every prisoner is processed. This operation continues until we're certain we have everything we need to prosecute every person involved." "Sir, you've been up all night." "You must be exhausted. I'll rest when this is done, Captain." "Not before." The officer nodded, recognizing that tone. There would be no argument that could change the president's mind, and so Ibrahim remained at the site throughout the day, overseeing every aspect of the evidence collection. He personally reviewed the documents seized from the command center, identifying the network of corruption that had enabled this theft. He interviewed key prisoners, piecing together how long this operation had been running and who had known about it. As the sun began to set on what had been one of the longest days of his life, a complete picture emerged. The operation had been running for nearly 3 years. It involved not just Global Resources, but several other corporations working in consortium. Bribes had been paid to regional officials, though, thankfully, the investigation showed that Ibrahim's own central government had not been penetrated. The total amount stolen was staggering, an estimated $3.2 billion worth of gold, extracted and sold on international markets while Burkina Faso received nothing. That money could have built schools, hospitals, infrastructure. It could have lifted thousands out of poverty. Instead, it had lined the pockets of foreign executives and the officials who had enabled them. As darkness fell once again over the jungle, Ibrahim finally allowed himself to be convinced to return to the capital. He boarded the helicopter, looking back one last time at the illuminated operations site, now secured and guarded by his forces. The helicopter lifted off, carrying him up above the forest canopy. In the fading light, he could see the vast expanse of green stretching in all directions. Somewhere down there, a gorilla family was settling in for the night, the parents keeping watch over their infant who, by all rights, should not be alive. Ibrahim closed his eyes as exhaustion finally overtook him. His last conscious thought was a simple one. Compassion and duty need not be enemies. Sometimes they lead to the same destination if we have the courage to follow where they lead. 3 months had passed since that fateful night in the Zubi forest. The press conference Ibrahim had promised had indeed taken place, and it had sent shockwaves around the world. International media coverage had been extensive, forcing governments and corporations to respond. Global Resources had seen its stock price plummet as investors fled a company now synonymous with corruption. Several executives had been arrested in their home countries, facing extradition to Burkina Faso to stand trial. Other mining companies, fearing they might be next, had begun renegotiating their contracts across Africa, offering better terms to avoid similar scandals. The money, or at least a significant portion of it, was being recovered. International courts had frozen assets, and slowly but surely, the stolen wealth was being returned to Burkina Faso. It would take years to fully recover everything, but the process had begun. But perhaps more importantly, the incident had sparked a larger conversation about resource exploitation in Africa. Other nations had begun auditing their own mining operations, discovering similar schemes. A movement was building, a determination among African leaders that the days of casual exploitation were over. Ibrahim stood in his office in the capital, looking at a photograph that hung on the wall. It had been taken by one of the soldiers during the raid, showing the illegal mining operation from above. But it wasn't the operation that drew his attention. It was the forest surrounding it, vast and green and enduring. A knock at the door drew his attention. "Enter." His chief of staff came in carrying a folder. "Mr. President, I have the environmental impact report you requested on the Zubi forest region." Ibrahim took the folder and opened it. The report detailed the damage done by the illegal mining, but also the forest's remarkable resilience. With proper management and protection, the ecosystem would recover. "I want that entire region declared a national park," Ibrahim said. "Protected status. No mining, no logging, no development. The Zubi forest will remain wild." That will be expensive, sir. We'll need rangers, anti-poaching patrols, monitoring systems. We'll find the money. Some of what we're recovering from the stolen gold can be allocated to conservation. It seems appropriate, don't you think? Money stolen from our land being used to protect our land? The chief of staff smiled. Very appropriate, sir. After the man left, Ibrahim returned to the window. In the distance, he could just make out the green line of jungle on the horizon. Somewhere out there in that protected wilderness, a gorilla family lived their lives in peace. He would never know if the silverback had truly understood what it was doing when it pointed him toward that hidden valley. He would never know if it was divine providence, random chance, or something in between that had brought him to that clearing at that exact moment. But it didn't matter. What mattered was the lesson he had learned, that compassion and justice were not opposing forces, but complementary ones. That protecting the weak, whether human or animal, was never a waste of time or resources. That sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could lead to the greatest victories. Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, had gone into the jungle as a soldier hunting criminals. He had emerged as something more, a guardian not just of his people, but of all life within his nation's borders. And if sometimes, late at night, he dreamed of a silverback gorilla nodding to him in the shadows, of a tiny infant taking its first breath after being pulled back from death, of a forest that had tested him and found him worthy. Well, those were dreams worth having. Justice, he had learned, came in many forms. And sometimes it was delivered not by courts or armies, but by the simple choice to do the right thing, even when no one was watching, even when it cost you something precious. The forest remembered. Nature remembered. And in remembering, it rewarded those who showed that humanity still had room for compassion, even in the hardest of hearts. Outside his window, the sun set over Burkina Faso, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold. And in the Zubi forest, protected now forever, a gorilla family watched the same sunset, safe and at peace. The circle was complete. Life had been saved. Justice had been served. And the guardian of the jungle, both human and animal, could rest easy knowing they had fulfilled their duty. The story was over. But its echoes would continue for generations to come. The end.